You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Anyway, we have Jim Robbins on the line here. Jim, how close are we?
How close are we to what?
Custer.
So we go to Custer? Well, he's getting there. I was just writing today about a bison hunt that he had with a Russian prince and how they were having a great time bison hunting, but things got a little crazy and Philip Sheridan almost got a bullet in his head. But anyway.
Well, I've been following all your the posts of the different pictures and illustrations that you've been putting on Facebook, and I'm very excited and can't wait till it's ready.
Oh, yeah, it'll be out next year around Father's Day, so we're just getting the first draft done, and then there'll be a lot of editing and marketing and all this other jazz, but it's all part of the fun of putting out a book.
Sounds good. So, Jim, we predicted over the last couple of weeks that this whole Syria thing is just an absolute debacle, and I went so far as about 2 weeks ago in a meeting down in Washington to make the statement, maybe we should just let the Russians handle it. Little did I know that we would be seeing what's transpiring in a news cycle today, where all of a sudden John Kerry makes a statement, then the Russians and the Syrians are, yeah, let's do this. And this is craziness, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. The administration has so botched this, and the president looks so foolish coming out of this. I mean, you have to go back to a year ago when he made his red line statement, which, the White House has tried to get away from a couple of times, like it was just some offhand comment he made. But he reiterated it in December at a speech at National Defense University. They reiterated it in January and then again in March. So this wasn't some thing that he just sort of said off the top of his head, which, by the way, is bad enough, because when you have the President of the United States making important policy statements just sort of, off the cuff, that's really bad. So they have the red line, then they can prove that Syria used chemical weapons or not. They have the intelligence, but they won't show it to anybody. He says he has the authority as commander-in-chief to order a military strike, but he's going to kick it to Congress anyway. And then, of course, Congress is in no mood to approve whatever he's talking about. He says that we're going to have military action, but it's going to be limited. Then John Kerry said, yeah, it's going to be unbelievably small. Well, that's going to scare everybody, won't it? If you're a bad guy, wouldn't you be afraid? If you're the Iranians watching this, aren't you scared of the unbelievably small attack the United States is going to make? And then the White House had to walk that one back, saying, no, we don't do pinprick attacks, but it's going to be highly surgical. Well, okay, no one knows what you're talking about. They release what the targets are going to be. They talk about what the timetable is going to be for the attack. But then they say, oh, well, maybe there's not going to be an attack. Okay, you can hand over your weapons. No, wait, you can't hand over your weapons, the State Department said. That was just a rhetorical flourish. But then the Russians jump on it, and then the White House says, okay. So, can you follow it?
Well, quite frankly, Jim, this is exactly what we expected when the man was elected in the first place, and then we witnessed the first full term, and of course, what are we, halfway through this first year? And it's only gotten worse. And look, I just hope we can get through his term without significant loss of American life and any more catastrophic financial, economic damage. And then we can get back to rebuilding, I suppose. But that's about the best we have to hope for, is to get by his term and then rebuild.
Yeah, this is absolutely the worst presidential management of foreign affairs I've ever seen. And I'm not a fan of Mr. Obama, but I'm not engaging in hyperbole either. I can't think of a crisis that has been this screwed up. Misstatements, explanations, trying to be on all sides of the issue at once. Nobody knows what his objectives are. Nobody knows what he's getting at. Being buffeted about by events, gaffed by senior officials. I mean, John Kerry, he makes Dan Quayle look like, Cicero or somebody. And just the way this whole thing has been handled, and it all leads up to what? Vladimir Putin looking like some kind of statesman genius. So, good for America. This is really good stewardship of our national security, of our foreign policy, of our international reputation. This entire thing is a joke. And if Mr. Obama believes, as he has said, that his reputation is not on the line, he better look at the poll.
That's a very good point. And by the way, his blundering on this issue has made both Bushes look like absolute geniuses when we both know that they've made their share of mistakes too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's been, for a while now, the reputation of the United States in the Middle East has been worse, according to opinion polls. It's been worse than it was in the closing years of the Bush administration when, Mr. Obama said that he was going to restore the reputation and the honor of the United States and have an opening to the Arab world and a bunch of stuff like that. Well, for a while, it's been much worse. Now I can't guess that it's going to get any better. I mean, the guy just looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. And other countries now, I think they have the green light to completely blow off the United States with whatever they want to do. If I were an Iranian leader looking at this, I would say, wow, not only did he not back up his red line that he then tried to deny he even made, then he got into this thing where he was too confused or too weak or whatever to order a military strike, and then bam, the Russians just kind of swoop in and pull Assad's, out of the fire. And, the Iranians got to be saying, hey, you know what, with this nuclear weapon program, let's get it done while this guy is still president because, the next guy might actually be a president.
Jim, I tell you, it is really frightening. And the only thing that surprises me is how many Americans on both sides of the aisle are really speaking out against president. Now, as I was pointing out in the show yesterday, there are some people on the left who are backpedaling, and that's a shame because look, as much as you and Brett and I and probably the majority of the people listening to the final say are not exactly what you would call fans of Barack Obama, either policy-wise or action, what his strategy and his tactics are for trying to implement policy. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans, and we understand that when our men and women are in uniform or we're considering putting those people out in the field, that we need to take it, drop that serious, and move beyond the political pandering. But at the end of the day, I mean, you got to say it. I mean, as a commander-in-chief, Obama looks like an absolute befuddling idiot. There's no, you could pull off a really good speech if you're a poised, articulate, charismatic kind of guy like he is with a teleprompter. But having him out there trying to run from the hip policy, as you pointed out, it's like having a Special Forces soldier running point who has Tourette syndrome. It's a recipe for disaster, and people will die, not just Americans. I mean, our allies, even enemies. I mean, that don't necessarily have to die. And, Jim, I sit here, and even situations where I want to try to side with the president on certain issues, because I'm one of those people who hates war, but I also think that it's only a matter of time until a much larger Iranian-centric conflagration is coming. So I'd rather take a strategic stand and have a plan where we get to determine the time and the date. But even the hawk in me looks at this guy and says, but God, not with him in charge. Now, I don't believe, Jim, for a minute that we'll get through his presidency before Iran gets the bomb. That, to me, is the single scariest thing. And before I turn it over, the mic over to you, Jim, because I gave you a lot of fodder here, one of the things that Obama did say in one of his speeches last night is that the most pressing thing of everything going on in the world, the single most pressing thing on his mind right now is these, relatively, as sick as they are, these relatively limited gas strikes that are going on, and not really Iran, not really the American economy, not really the fact that Russia is becoming stronger and taking ships. And you just scratch your head, Jim, and you say, what America did I wake up on this morning?
Oh, yeah, and someone might remind him that we have guys dying in Afghanistan every day. So, he as commander-in-chief might want to think about that occasionally. I don't know what he is going to say to the American people tonight. I know they have to rewrite the speech because whatever he was planning on saying has now been overcome by events as orchestrated by Russia. So we're going to lamely kind of follow Russia's lead on this. But, suppose they say, okay, we're going to implement one of the chemical weapons treaties, and there will be inspections, and there will be a turnover, and all this other stuff. Someone has to pay for that, by the way, and I bet we will be the ones paying for it, which is great. So we get to dechemicalize Syria and foot the bill. But this is a country in the middle of a civil war in which 100,000 people have been killed. So you're telling me that international inspectors and chemical weapons specialists are just going to show up in Syria one day and then calmly go about their business in the middle of a war zone? How exactly is this, wonderful peace initiative supposed to be implemented? I'd just like to hear some more details on that. Furthermore, I don't think that the rebel side has signed on to this agreement. I read something today that said they explicitly reject it. And furthermore, there's some evidence that the bad guys also have chemical weapons and also have been using them. So we're going to go after those chemical weapons too? Just a few questions for the president.
Well, Jim, you just summed up some of the reasons why this is almost a guaranteed failure. And the problem, of course, is here we have Obama looking like, and remember, in this particular case, while Obama is completely incorrect about the red lines and about whether he looks like a failure, he absolutely looks weak. He looks pathetic. But guess what? So do we as a country, because the rest of the world understands this is what you get when a bunch of soft people who want to get in line for a bunch of free stuff like cheese and Obama phones and free housing get to the polls. This is what happens. I mean, you can see where democracy wouldn't exactly look like an attractive alternative for a lot of people. They'd be saying, America is already falling, and look what democracy did in Egypt. And I'll tell you, Jim, the other point, and there's just some of the things that are really not being spoken about much here, is what are the chemical weapons? Where are they? How much? Do we have an inventory? I mean, those are the other questions I've heard. And how much of this may have actually come in from Iraq? And we have the same people who told us we were insane about everything that happened in Iraq and the head up to that they all sound exactly like the Bush crew did heading into the Iraq war, but with zero acknowledgement of any of the lessons learned from that war or the replays or, again, the transition stuff, Jim, like where did those weapons go that, by the way, the generals have admitted to having had, and supposedly some were destroyed and some were trucked in. It's just a scary no-win thing, Jim, is it not?
Oh, yeah. And also, if you go back to 2 years ago, the president said that it was time for Bashar Assad to step aside. I mean, he implicitly, if not explicitly, made regime change the national policy of the United States. Now he apparently is going to say that the United States is going to enter into an international accord with this regime that he said was illegitimate and needs to go in order to implement this plan to somehow get rid of an unknown number of chemical weapons that are in, unknown storage facilities and so forth. It can take a long time to do, particularly in a war zone. But what it all adds up to for the Assad regime is confirmation that they, in fact, run the country, that they are the legitimate government in Damascus, because now our diplomats are going to have to conclude an agreement with them. And for the past 2 years, the president was kind of edging towards something with the rebels. We were going to have talks in Geneva where Russia was going to be the proxy for Syria and we were going to be the proxy for the rebels. We couldn't get the rebels to the table, so that just fizzled. And now we're going to have to go back to acknowledging that the Assad regime is a legitimate government in Syria, which completely undoes everything that we had feebly been trying to do for the last several years.
Yeah, all good and valid points, Jim. I think we could all sum this up as, again, just really a disaster, not just because of it's like such an unclear policy, and any step that he's taken, he's just unwilling or unable to back up. But at the end of the day, in future dealings that we're going to have with, the next thing that explodes in the Middle East or Africa or possibly Asia or South America, how are foreign governments or entities supposed to take the United States government serious and as a legitimate player, or even trust them to follow through on things when we behave the way we are now? And I'll give you an example, Jim, just before we wrap up. Israel must be looking at this, wondering, are we going to have to deal with Iran on our own? Because how could we trust this president and his administration to properly respond to the Iranian threat? And I don't think they can. I think Benjamin Netanyahu has to be now planning for what he does on his own.
Oh, yeah, if he hadn't been already. I mean, he must be shaking his head like, who is this clown in the White House? I mean, it must just be astonishing to him how badly this has been handled. What a lack of knowledge of the way things work in the Middle East, or just in diplomacy in general, that we're seeing from the White House. Yeah, I think the two countries that are watching this the most closely are the Israelis and the Iranians, and knowing that something is going to happen pretty soon where they're going to have to square off. And the United States is going to stand there kind of helplessly and not know what's going on. John Kerry will make a few speeches. Barack Obama will contradict himself 10 times trying to find the right side of the issue to be on to maintain his place in history or whatever he thinks he's doing. And then we're going to have a war.
Absolutely. So, Jim, why don't you give a plug for I know you're writing with the USA Today right now, right?
Yeah, and let me tell you something. USA Today keeps asking me to do something on the current crisis, and then they keep changing the goalposts. So I did have something out today on this that summarized some of these points, but it was supposed to be a prelude to the president's speech, but now we don't even know what the heck he's going to say, so they just ran it anyway.
That makes your job hard, doesn't it?
It really does. He's going to stick to something
surrender,
for me to criticize. Yeah, just pick a policy and stick to it so we can slam it.
So he's really ticking off both sides of the media, isn't he?
Yeah, well, he doesn't have far to go these days.
Anyway, Jim, great to speak with you this week. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to speaking with you again next week.
Okay, thanks, guys.
All right, take it easy, Jim. It's James S. Robbins. By the way, go get a copy of his book, Native Americans.